once again, we'll turn to Ecclesiastes. We finished chapter 3 last week. We see that we are to live in the awareness of God's sovereignty. We see in those latter verses that He's in control of the cycle of human history, and human history is just that. It's a cycle. Things just repeat themselves over and over. Nothing really new. We see that we're to live in the awareness of His sovereignty, and this is to be so in the injustices of life, and there are many. Verse 16 and 17, and moreover, I saw under the sun the place of judgment. That is the place where you would expect judgment to take place, that wickedness was there, and the place of righteousness, that iniquity was there. I said in my heart, God shall judge the righteous and the wicked, for there is a time for every purpose and for every work. In other words, don't get stuck on the injustices of life. Don't get stuck on the wickedness of life, but focus upon the Lord. We see that we're to, the overall subject there in the latter part of Ecclesiastes is that we're to view life as a gift from God and enjoy the life that God has given us. We are to enjoy it not to the extent that it's apart from God, but we are to enjoy life. God gives us life to enjoy, but again, we must focus upon God in all the enjoyments of life. So our attitude toward God's sovereignty, looking at life, looking at God's sovereignty, should be one of resignation. Resignation to the will of God. We think of Eli, the high priest of Israel, upon Solomon delivering the message that God was going to slay his two sons. In 1 Samuel 3, verse 18, he just resigned to the will of God. In view of God's sovereignty, we're to live in thankfulness, in joy, and an operative faith will rejoice. If we see God, we will rejoice. And then, of course, we are to live a life of worship of the Lord. So that brings us to Ecclesiastes chapter 4. And we would entitle this, Life Apart from God is Oppressive. It is oppressive. Ecclesiastes, again, is the personal observations and experiences of Solomon living his life apart from God. Again, Solomon had everything. Had wealth, had everything. Everything at his disposal. But he got to a state where he lived apart from God. And what he discovered is that there is no lasting fulfillment, there is no lasting happiness, there is no lasting satisfaction in life apart from God. That's why man is always searching, because there is no lasting satisfaction in the temple. You can find some satisfaction, you can find some happiness, you can find some fulfillment, but none of it's lasting. And this is Solomon's whole point in the book of Ecclesiastes. He had sought fulfillment and happiness in the temporal apart from God, and now he gives his summary of that life. So it's his testimony of life apart from God, life lived without God, has the focus and has the emphasis. And he says it's all vanity. It's all vanity. It's all empty. It is Solomon's testimony that life without God having the preeminence, without Him being the object of life, again, it's all vanity. It's his testimony of a life lived for self, a life lived for self-gratification, a life lived for self-satisfaction, a life lived for time rather than eternity, a life lived for the temporal rather than the spiritual. He says it's all vanity. In the end, there's nothing lasting, because life on this earth ends. So the book of Ecclesiastes is Solomon's thoughts, his reflections upon life, upon a life without fellowship with God. Again, Solomon's view of life apart from God. It's basically Proverbs 13:15. The way of transgressors is hard. The way of transgressors is hard. So again, the message of Ecclesiastes: a life lived apart from God is a life filled with disturbance. It is a life filled with agitation. People are agitated. They stay that way. The agitation builds. It's a life filled with turmoil, disillusionment, and dysfunction. And we see those things everywhere today. In this 4th chapter, Solomon is observing, and his observations are marked by certain words and phrases. In verse 1, he says, I returned, that is, in thought. My mind returned back to and considered. He's observing. In verse 4, he says, I considered. In verse 7, he says, I saw. And in verse 15, I considered. All of those are words or phrases indicative of Solomon is giving thought to what he has seen. Solomon is giving thought to life. He states in Ecclesiastes chapter 8 and verse 9, all this have I seen, his observations, and applied my heart unto every work done under the sun. So he's considering life. Most live life giving very little thought to life. Most go through a day giving very little thought to what they've seen in that day. Giving very little thought to the observations of life. Most live life oblivious. Again, most are very poor at living life. Most fail at living life. And someone will say, well, we need an instruction book. We've got one. We've got it. It's an instruction how to live life. So Solomon is paying attention to life. He's paying attention to events. He's not oblivious to what is going on around him. But you can pay attention to life, but if it's minus God, It doesn't make sense. Life doesn't make sense. If you remove God from the picture, it's all vanity. It's all emptiness. You can't make sense of it. So in our observations, we have to, again, not live apart from God, but God is the focus. God's people should be a people who view life through the lens of God and His Word. God and His Word explain the events of life. The events of life. Again, people say all the time. Last week we were upon the injustices of life. There's injustice everywhere. Well, if there's a God, why is there so much injustice? Evil is everywhere. If there's a God, why is there so much evil? But if you understand who God is, and you understand the sovereignty of God, it may not answer all the questions, but you have someone to trust. And you just know it's all going to work out because God's in control. So he gives serious thought. He lived a huge portion of his life without any thought of God. He's just living for the temporal. But now he's come back and he's viewing that life apart from God. And again, it's all vanity. And that's how most live. Notice in Luke 17. This is explaining what it will be like before Christ returns. And it's always been this way since the fall, but it just continually progresses and becomes more and more so all the time. Luke 17, verse 27 and 28. In verse 26, and as it was in the days of Noah, so shall it be also in the days of the Son of Man. Then he tells us what they did. They did eat. Nothing wrong with that. They drank. Nothing wrong with that. They married wives. Nothing wrong with that. They were given in marriage. Nothing wrong with any of that. Until the day that Noah entered into the ark, and the flood came and destroyed them all. Likewise, also as it was in the days of Lot. They did eat, they did drink, they bought, they sold, they planted, they builded. But the same day that Lot went out of Sodom, it rained fire and brimstone from heaven and destroyed them all. What he's saying here is they went through life eating, drinking, marrying, raising children. They just went through life without giving any thought whatsoever to the Lord. Just living life. And that's pretty much how it is. People just live life without giving very little thought to the fact here in this case that judgment was coming. Just live life without any thought. And that's what Solomon is viewing here, is that for the most part people just live life without any thought of God and His Word. So again, he's observing life apart from God. And here in chapter 4, he observes 4 major and very prevalent problems in the everyday life of a fallen and broken world. And the world is fallen, and the world is broken. And he mentions four major prevalent problems. And these are increased if you live apart from God. These things increase. So again, we're to observe life. We're to gather lessons from life. Notice in Proverbs 24, this is a proverb that addresses the subject of laziness, which is one of the four things that Solomon mentions. It's not what we're going to speak on right now. We'll be there next week. But in Proverbs 24, verse 30, he says, I went by the field of the slothful. Just walk by the field of the slothful. And by the vineyard of the man void of understanding. And lo, it, the field and the vineyard, was all grown over with thorns and nettles, had covered the face thereof. And the stone wall thereof was broken down. And here it is. Then I saw and considered it well. So he gave this some thought. And that's what he's doing here in Ecclesiastes chapter 4. He said, one day I go by the field. He concluded that it was the field of the slothful. He concluded that it was the vineyard of a man without understanding because of what he observed. The field was all grown over with thorns. Wasn't taken care of. The wall was broken down. Again, one day there's 100 weeds out in the yard. Well, I'll get them tomorrow. Now there's 300. Well, I'll get it another time. And on it goes. Looks out one day and sees his wall, and one of the stones is falling out of the wall. Well, I'll get to it later. And on it goes. Pretty soon the whole wall's broken down. But my point here is, because again, we're going to get on slothfulness later, is that he observed just a simple thing of life. And he observed it. And he drew lessons from it. Notice, verse 32, then I saw and considered it well. I looked upon it and received instruction. Observe life. There's instruction all around us. Just simple things. Someone's yard not mowed. There's lessons there. Perhaps they're sick, who knows? But there's lessons. There's lessons everywhere. Yet, here's the conclusion he came to. Yet a little sleep, a little slumber, a little folding of the hands to sleep, so shall thy poverty come. So again, the point is, observe. Observe life. There's lessons. Observe people. Observe the behavior of people. There are life lessons. But today what happens, people in their observation say, well, that happened to them, but that wouldn't happen to me. But it will. It will. God's giving us lessons every single day. All that we would, and again, you don't have to be saved to observe the lessons of life. They're all around us. So he comes here to the first, in Ecclesiastes 4, major and prevalent problem in the world, in society. In verse 1, there's the mention of oppressions. Oppressions, plural. That which is unjust and excessive. Oppressions. It is a sense of being weighted down in body or mind. This world is filled with that which will weigh us down physically, mentally, in every other way. The world is filled with it. More so if you live life apart from God. It is, oppressions is heavy stress. Heavy stress. There's a lot of stress living life apart from God. It's anguish. Stress turns into anguish. It's a controlling anxiety. Oppressions. An anxiety that controls us. There's probably more anxiety today than there's ever been. That's what happens when life is lived apart from God, because there's no answers. Apart from God, there's no answers. Verse 1, again, there are oppressions, plural. That means these oppressions, these weights, come from a variety of sources. And then notice, verse 1, there are the oppressed. You have oppressions. You have the oppressed, those who are the victim of the oppressions. And notice also in verse 1, there are the oppressors. The world is a place of oppression. That's so. Even if you live focused upon God, the world is a place of oppression. You're going to get weighted down. But you take God out of the picture, and these oppressions become more and more and more prevalent. The results of these oppressions, notice verse 1, you have the words tears and no comforter. The idea is tears, sorrow. No comforter, the idea is helplessness or hopelessness. Life lived apart from God. Again, life in the world has, you're going to have sorrows. That's true whether or not you live focused upon God or you're oblivious of God. There's going to be sorrows in life. That's just the nature of life. But how much more prevalent when you live life minus God, then you don't have answers for your sorrows. If you live focused upon God, you have some answers. And then eventually you come to no comforter. Helplessness. Hopelessness. And that's pretty much describes life in the world apart from God. No comforter. No comforter. You live in a state of helplessness long enough, and that becomes a state of hopelessness. And that's pretty much sums up the life of those live apart from God. In Zechariah chapter 10, in verse 2. For the idols have spoken vanity, and the diviners have seen a lie, and have told false dreams. They comfort in vain, therefore they went their way as a flock. They were troubled because there was no shepherd. They were troubled because there was no shepherd. No one to lead them in the right direction. That pretty much describes the world. It's Matthew 9, verse 36. But when he saw the multitudes, he was moved with compassion on them. Jesus is viewing the multitudes. And he's moved with compassion because they fainted. And they were scattered abroad as sheep having no shepherd. And that's what it's like to live life apart from God. So back in Ecclesiastes 4, Solomon goes on to say in verses 2 and 3, and how many times you've heard people say this? Again, keep in mind, Solomon is viewing life apart from God. What he says in verses 2 and 3 is that it would be better to be dead than to endure the oppression and the cruelty of the world. How many times you've heard someone say that? I wish I was never born. Why did I have to be born? Just wish I could die. Well, if you viewing life apart from God, let me tell you, you don't want to die, and you're not better off. But that's a statement of hopelessness. That is a statement of despair. And how do you get there? Well, you live long enough apart from God, oblivious of God, the sorrows pile up. The fact that you have no comforter piles up, and pretty soon you're in a state of despair. People who are in a state of despair are angered very easily when remedies are presented to them. That's where we are. That's where we are today. So what you have here in verses 2 and 3, this perspective is one of gloom and despair. I'd be better off dead. Wish I was never born. Man apart from God does not. We see this every day. All you have to do is turn on the news for 5 minutes. Man apart from God does not have the answer to the plagues of society. And when he does think he has the answer, and he always does, his answers just increase the plague. Just bring on a different plague. Just bring on something different. Well, we've abolished this problem, but we've created 15 more over here. And that's man. All his answers create, it may solve one problem, most of the time it doesn't, but it almost always increases, brings on new problems. And you see this, the longer you live, you can see it. We have problems today we didn't have 10 years ago, 30 years ago. Because man's remedies, that's what they do. Man doesn't have the answer. And if we observe life like we're supposed to, we would come to this conclusion. The politicians and man in general do not have the answer. They don't know what they're talking about. Most of them don't even know what the problem is. And if you don't know what the problem is, how can you have the solution? They have no idea of the problem. So man and his remedies basically creates more problems. Because man goes to extremes. He goes from one extreme to the next. It increases problems. He always thinks he has the perfect solution. Doesn't take long. Well, what about this? Well, we didn't see that. No, because man is so limited. Life is oppressive. Life lived apart from God is going to result in being weighted down in body and mind, leading to a sense of gloom, a sense of frustration, and eventual despair. And you see that all through society. Life outside the pattern of God. God gives us a pattern for life. He sets that pattern in the very first sentence of the Bible. In the beginning, God. There it is. Start with God. Start with God. That's God's pattern. But it ends up being a life of frustration and despair. But again, Solomon's conclusion, let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter, Ecclesiastes 12:13. Fear God. Reverence God. Keep His commandments. Yes, life is oppressive. Life can be cruel. There are injustices everywhere. What are we to do? Let us hear the conclusion of the whole matter. Fear God. Keep His commandments. Then he moves on in verses 4 through 6, and he comes to the second prevalent problem, and that is envy, covetousness, and greed. The world is filled with it. Everywhere you turn, there's envy. Everywhere you turn, there's covetousness and greed. Everywhere. And we see this is addressed in verses 4 through 6. In these verses, you see the words travail, envied, vanity, and vexation. Those are all words that speak of agony and torment. They speak of a destructive emotion. They speak of emptiness without substance. That which is irritating. People are irritated. And they can blame their irritations on a lot of things, but it basically boils down to one. Life lived apart from God. These are things that are afflicting and troubling. And they're the characteristic of a fallen and broken world, but even more so of a life minus God and apart from God. In verse 4, Solomon observes earthly work. He says, "Again I considered all travail and every right work," a right employment, a legitimate employment, nothing wrong with it. It's an honest living. "That for this a man is envied of his neighbor. This is good work, is also vanity and vexation of spirit." We'll stop there. We've run out of time. But again, enjoy life focused upon God. Trust God. When you don't understand, trust Him. Just trust Him. Let's look to the Lord. Heavenly